crowd was growing larger, phones were recording, and Officer Bradley was enjoying every second of his public display of authority. He had no idea that among the witnesses was the one person who could destroy his career with a single word. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and a comment before we start to learn more about what happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Richmond when Marcus Williams pulled into the parking space outside the community center where he volunteered twice a week. The 34-year-old software engineer had taken the afternoon off to help set up computers for the senior citizens' digital literacy program, something he'd been doing for the past 3 years. Marcus drove a well-maintained Honda Accord, dressed in business casual attire, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had worked hard for everything he'd achieved. As he stepped out of his car and reached into the back seat for his laptop bag, he had no idea that his afternoon was about to take a dramatic turn. Officer Thomas Bradley had been patrolling this area for the past 6 months, and in his mind, he knew exactly what belonged and what didn't. At 38 years old, Bradley had 12 years on the force and carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his badge gave him unlimited authority. He had a reputation among his colleagues for being thorough in his investigations, though some of the more experienced officers quietly questioned his methods. Bradley noticed the Honda Accord as soon as it parked. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him, though he couldn't articulate exactly what. The community center was in a mixed neighborhood, transitioning from its industrial past to a more gentrified present, and Bradley had appointed himself as the unofficial guardian of that transition. He pulled his patrol car to the curb and sat for a moment, watching Marcus through his windshield. When Marcus reached into his back seat, Bradley's hand instinctively moved closer to his radio. In his 12 years of experience, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were telling him that something was off. Marcus emerged from his car with a black laptop bag and a folder containing printouts of basic computer tutorials he'd prepared for the seniors. He was checking his phone for the time when he noticed the patrol car parked nearby. He glanced over briefly, made eye contact with the officer behind the wheel, and offered a polite nod before heading toward the community center entrance. That nod bothered Bradley. It seemed too casual, too familiar, like Marcus belonged there. Bradley had been patrolling this area long enough to know the regulars, and he didn't recognize this particular individual. More concerning to Bradley was the way Marcus moved with such confidence through a neighborhood that was still experiencing its share of property crimes and disturbances. Bradley waited another minute before stepping out of his patrol car. He adjusted his belt, checked his radio, and began walking toward the community center with the measured pace of someone conducting official business. By this time, Marcus had reached the front steps of the building and was fumbling with his keys to unlock the door. "Excuse me," Bradley called out, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd perfected over years of traffic stops and street encounters. Marcus turned around, laptop bag still slung over his shoulder, keys in his hand. "Yes, officer. Can I ask what you're doing here today?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus blinked, processing both the question and the tone in which it was delivered. "I volunteer here. Computer classes for seniors, every Tuesday and Thursday." Bradley stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. "Can I see some identification?" "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice remaining calm but with a slight edge of confusion. "Just routine questions. Identification, please." Marcus set his laptop bag down carefully and reached for his wallet, pulling out his driver's license. As he handed it over, he noticed that a few people walking by had begun to slow their pace, curious about the interaction unfolding on the community center steps. Bradley examined the license with exaggerated thoroughness, holding it up to the light and comparing the photo to Marcus's face multiple times. "Marcus Williams," he read aloud. this address current?" "Yes, sir." "What's in the bag?" Marcus gestured toward his laptop bag. "Computer equipment for the class. I teach basic computer skills to seniors every week." "Mind if I take a look?" The request was phrased as a question, but Bradley's tone made it clear it wasn't really optional. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then knelt down and opened his laptop bag, revealing a laptop, some cables, and the folder of printed tutorials. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Mrs. Chen, who participated in Marcus's computer classes, approached from across the street. Several teenagers walking home from school stopped to watch. A man walking his dog paused on the sidewalk, phone already in his hand. "Officer, this is Marcus," Mrs. Chen said, her accent thick but her voice clear. "He teaches us computers." "Very good teacher." Bradley barely acknowledged her. His attention was focused on Marcus, who was still kneeling beside his opened laptop bag. "Stand up slowly," Bradley instructed. Marcus complied, his movements deliberate and careful. The crowd was growing, and he could see phones being raised to record the interaction. This was not how he had planned to spend his afternoon. "Turn around and put your hands on the wall," Bradley ordered. "Officer, I don't understand. What am I suspected of doing?" "Turn around and put your hands on the wall." Now. The command was delivered with enough force that even the gathering crowd fell silent. Marcus looked around at the faces watching him, some confused, some concerned, some already pulling out phones to record. He had a choice to make, and he knew that whatever he chose would be captured on multiple devices and potentially shared across social media within hours. Marcus turned around and placed his hands against the brick wall of the community center. Bradley approached from behind and began patting him down, his movements rough and unnecessarily thorough. The crowd murmured, and Marcus could hear snippets of conversation. What did he do? "He teaches my grandmother computers. This is crazy. Someone call this in." Bradley found Marcus's wallet, phone, and car keys, placing each item on the hood of a nearby car as he continued his search. The whole process took several minutes, during which the crowd continued to grow and more phones appeared to document the scene. "Sir, you're clean," Bradley announced, as if he had expected to find something incriminating. But instead of ending the encounter, he seemed to be considering his next move. Marcus remained facing the wall, his hands still pressed against the brick. "Officer, am I free to go?" "Not yet. I need to verify some information." Bradley walked back to his patrol car to run Marcus's information through the system. This gave the crowd time to grow larger and for more people to start recording. Among the witnesses was Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been in Marcus's computer class the previous week, and Mr. Thompson, whose grandson Marcus had helped build a resume using basic word processing software. What none of them knew was that among the crowd gathering to watch this public display was Commissioner James Washington, the newly appointed head of the Richmond Police Department. Washington had taken the position just 6 weeks earlier, after a distinguished career that had taken him from beat cop to federal law enforcement and back to local police work. Commissioner Washington had been driving through the neighborhood on his way back from a community meeting when he noticed the growing crowd and the patrol car. As someone who made it a point to be visible in the community and accessible to citizens, he decided to stop and observe. Washington parked his unmarked black sedan half a block away and approached on foot, his badge and identification clipped to his belt, but not immediately visible under his navy blue blazer. To most observers, he looked like another concerned citizen drawn to the commotion. Bradley returned from his patrol car with a slight swagger, clearly enjoying the attention his investigation was receiving. Marcus's background check had come back clean, as Bradley had suspected it would, but he wasn't ready to end his performance. "Mr. Williams," Bradley called out loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "I'm going to need you to turn around." Marcus turned around slowly, his hands visible and his expression carefully neutral. The afternoon sun was in his eyes, making it difficult to see all the faces in the crowd, but he could sense the tension and attention focused on him. "Sir, your record is clean, but I still have some concerns about your presence in this neighborhood." The statement drew murmurs from the crowd. Mrs. Chen stepped forward again. "Officer, he volunteers here. We know him." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back," Bradley responded without looking at her. Commissioner Washington moved closer, positioning himself where he could hear the conversation clearly while remaining unnoticed by Bradley. What he was witnessing troubled him deeply, both as a law enforcement professional and as someone who had experienced similar encounters in his younger years. "Officer," Marcus said carefully, "I'd like to understand what specific concerns you have. I've provided identification. You've searched me and found nothing suspicious, and community members have vouched for my presence here. What exactly am I suspected of doing?" It was a reasonable question delivered in a calm tone, but Bradley seemed to interpret it as a challenge to his authority. "I don't like your attitude, sir. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The crowd reacted with audible shock. Several people started talking at once. "What is he being arrested for? This is ridiculous. Get this on video." Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him, many of whom he recognized from his volunteer work. "Officer, I'm going to comply, but I want to state clearly that I don't understand what I'm being arrested for." "Disorderly conduct and interfering with a police investigation," Bradley announced as he pulled out his handcuffs. Commissioner Washington stepped forward, his expression serious but controlled. "Officer, excuse me." Bradley looked up from the handcuffs, annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, you need to step back. This is police business." "I understand that," Washington replied calmly. "I'm Commissioner James Washington, Richmond Police Department." The words hit Bradley like a physical blow. His hands froze on the handcuffs, and his face went through a series of expressions as he processed what he'd just heard. The crowd, which had been murmuring and commenting, fell almost completely silent. Bradley looked at Washington more carefully, taking in the badge clipped to his belt, the authoritative bearing, and the calm confidence in his voice. "Commissioner?" "That's correct. Could you please explain to me the probable cause for this arrest?" The question was delivered in a tone that was professional, but carried unmistakable authority. Bradley's swagger evaporated as he realized that his public display of power was being witnessed by the one person who could end his career. "Sir, the suspect was acting suspiciously in the neighborhood." "What specific suspicious behavior did you observe?" Bradley glanced around at the crowd, many of whom were still recording. Mrs. Chen was standing with her arms crossed, shaking her head. The teenagers who had stopped to watch were openly staring at the unfolding drama. He parked and went toward the building with a bag and... "Officer Bradley," Washington said, reading the name tag, "are you familiar with this community center and the programs they offer here?" "Yes, sir, somewhat." "And are you aware that they have regular volunteer programs, including computer literacy classes for seniors?" Bradley's face was reddening as he began to realize how completely his investigation was falling apart under scrutiny. Yes, sir, I believe so." Washington turned to Marcus, who was still standing with his hands behind his back, though Bradley had stopped trying to handcuff him. "Sir, could you explain your purpose here today?" "I volunteer here twice a week, teaching basic computer skills to senior citizens," Marcus replied. "I've been doing it for 3 years. I have a laptop and teaching materials in my bag." Washington nodded and turned back to Bradley. "Officer, based on what I've observed and heard, it appears this gentleman is a regular volunteer who was engaged in legitimate community service. Could you explain what specific crime you believe he was committing?" The question hung in the air while Bradley struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't sound completely ridiculous. The crowd was silent, waiting for his answer. "I thought I was investigating suspicious activity," Bradley said finally. "What made his activity suspicious?" Bradley looked around again, seeing the faces of community members who clearly knew and respected Marcus, seeing the phones recording his every word, and seeing the stern expression of the police commissioner who held his career in his hands. I may have misread the situation, sir." Washington's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "Officer Bradley, I want you to apologize to Mr. Williams and to the community members who witnessed this interaction." Bradley looked like he wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. "Mr. Williams, I apologize for the misunderstanding." Marcus nodded stiffly. "Apology accepted, officer." Washington addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize on behalf of the Richmond Police Department for this incident. We are committed to building positive relationships with all members of our community, and this interaction did not reflect our values or training standards." He turned back to Bradley. "Officer, you and I will be having a detailed conversation about this incident. Report to my office first thing tomorrow morning." "Yes, sir." Washington then approached Marcus. "Mr. Williams, again, I apologize for what you experienced today. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I'll make sure it receives a thorough investigation." Marcus considered the offer for a moment. "Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your response today. I think your presence here and your handling of the situation sends the right message." Washington nodded. "Community trust is something we have to earn every day. Thank you for your understanding." As the crowd began to disperse, many community members approached Marcus to offer support and express their outrage about what they had witnessed. Mrs. Chen patted his arm and said, "You good man, Marcus. We know you, good man." Officer Bradley had returned to his patrol car and was sitting behind the wheel, no doubt contemplating how drastically his afternoon had changed. Commissioner Washington approached the vehicle and knocked on the window. Bradley rolled down the window, his face still flushed with embarrassment. "Officer, we'll discuss this incident in detail tomorrow, but I want you to think carefully tonight about whether your actions today served the community or protected public safety." "Yes, sir." "And officer, the next time you're considering making an arrest, make sure you can articulate specific probable cause that would hold up in court and in the court of public opinion." "Understood, sir." Washington walked back toward his sedan, stopping briefly to shake hands with Marcus and several community members. As he drove away, he reflected on how much work remained to be done to rebuild trust between police and the communities they served. Marcus gathered his laptop bag and finally entered the community center, where a group of senior citizens was waiting for their computer lesson. Mrs. Chen had already told them what happened outside, and they greeted him with extra warmth and appreciation. "Marcus," said Mr. Peterson, an 80-year-old Korean War veteran, "that was handled with real class. You kept your cool and did everything right." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. That means a lot." As Marcus set up the computers for the afternoon's lesson, he thought about how differently the encounter could have ended if Commissioner Washington hadn't been there. He thought about all the people who face similar situations without witnesses, without cameras, and without someone in authority willing to step in. The computer class proceeded normally, with seniors learning to send emails and browse the internet. But the conversation kept returning to what had happened outside. Many of the participants shared their own stories of interactions with police, some positive, some troubling. "The important thing," Marcus told the group as he helped Mrs. Rodriguez set up her email account, "is that we don't let fear stop us from being part of our community. We have a right to be here, to volunteer, to contribute, and to be treated with dignity." Later that evening, videos of the incident had begun circulating on social media. The footage clearly showed Officer Bradley's escalating behavior and Commissioner Washington's professional intervention. The comments ranged from outrage at Bradley's conduct to praise for Washington's leadership. The next morning, Officer Bradley sat in Commissioner Washington's office. Washington had reviewed the body camera footage and spoken with witnesses. "Officer Bradley," Washington began, "tell me what you learned from yesterday." Bradley had spent a sleepless night thinking. "Sir, I learned that I let my assumptions override my training. I didn't have probable cause for the stop." "What assumptions?" "I assumed that because Mr. Williams was a black man in that neighborhood, he didn't belong there. I was wrong." Washington nodded. "Your assumptions led you to violate his constitutional rights. You embarrassed the department and damaged community trust." "Yes, sir. You're suspended without pay pending investigation. You'll complete additional training before returning to patrol duties." Bradley's shoulders sagged. "Sir, I'd like to apologize to Mr. Williams personally." Washington studied him. "I'll speak with Mr. Williams. But rebuilding trust isn't just about apologies. It's about changing behavior over time." Marcus continued his volunteer work, now with deeper appreciation for the importance of allies willing to speak up. The incident became a case study in the police department's training programs, illustrating the consequences of acting on unconscious bias. Some encounters change everything, not through violence, but through the power of accountability, witnessed by those willing to speak truth in moments that matter.